we're now ready to start with our presentation for the afternoon, which I know that many of you are eager to hear because we know that it was a sold out session. So I'm happy now to turn the microphone over to Dr. Julia Henderson, and she will be now introducing our wonderful presenter for this afternoon. And Dr. Julia Henderson is from UBC, from the Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy. So welcome, and over to you for the afternoon.
Thank you so much, Mary Lou. Hi, everyone. Wow, what a great turnout today. Yes, I'm Julia Henderson, and I'd like to respectfully acknowledge today that we're gathered here in what settlers call the city of Vancouver at the beautiful Van Dusen Gardens on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded stolen lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I'm very grateful to the traditional caretakers of these lands who have tended to them since time immemorial. And I'm honored personally to live, work, and learn on these lands. Welcome to the Dialogue on Aging public presentation series, which is hosted by the Edwin S. H. Leong Center for Healthy Aging at UBC and Providence Healthcare. Today, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Eli Peterman as this month's speaker. Eli is an associate professor in the School of Kinesiology at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. He is the Canada Research Chair in Physical Activity and Health since 2015 and has recently been elected as a member to the Royal Society of Canada College of Scholars, Artists, and Scientists. Dr. Peterman's research program has focused on non-biological processes, including psychosocial and behavioral factors that impact mental, physical, and cellular health, with the goal of revealing new insights into our understanding and treatments of disease and mortality. So please join me in welcoming Eli.
I am really excited to be here. This is a wonderful opportunity for me to speak to all of you, to present some of the work that we do in my lab at the University of British Columbia, work that I've been doing for about 15, 20 years on the effects of stress on health and well-being. And also to kind of examine how physical activity can support highly stressed individuals. I won't get into all the research that I do, because I also want to save some time for a little activity at the end. I promise you, it's not going to be an activity where people are expected to do any movement. I'm not that kind of person who forces groups of people into like stretching, or I don't like when that happens to me, so I don't force anyone to do that. But I might ask for some volunteers to come up to the front and do a little activity with me if people are willing to. I also want to say that I am suffering from some allergies. I've been taking my meds, so I will sometimes have a coughing fit. So I have my water here. I sometimes speak too quickly, so you need to tell me to slow down. I get very excited and passionate about my work. I also want to highlight that the people in the back, there's some small words on here sometimes. I will make sure that all small words all are spoken orally. And if you're kind of not understanding something, please just raise your hand and say, please explain that again. We'll save questions for the end. You know, if you have other questions more than just what's on the slide, I will then repeat it. So on that, I will start my presentation. Okay, so my talk is on movement as a treatment for poor health and well-being in adults with adversity. First, before I begin, I just need to acknowledge all the people who have really supported me in my career. Anita DeLongis, who some people might know at the University of British Columbia from the Department of Psychology, but some really other seminal people who've really been instrumental to the research that you're going to see. Dr. Alyssa Eppel, who, if anyone follows the work on stress and well-being, on telomeres and cell aging, she is one of the leading researchers on this topic, together with Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel laureate in the discovery on telomeres and telomerase from the University of California, San Francisco. Nancy Adler, sorry, she just passed away. I don't expect to get emotional, but I do. Nancy Adler, who recently passed away, but she's one of the grandparents of the field of health psychology. Her early research was really on developing an understanding of the impact of abortions on women. That was her work in the 70s and 80s, and she really moved into how adversity across the lifespan really impacts health and well-being from a larger sociological perspective. And Kristen Johansson and Richard Sloan, who are mentors in my physical activity research, and they've been part of a number of different studies that I've worked on. This is my lab, some wonderful people. We have a couple of them here in the room, Brooke and Hannah at the end. You'll see them. They really help with advancing a lot of the science that we do in this lab, in our lab. So what are my objectives for today's talk? First, my first objective is to examine the negative consequences of cumulative stress on health and well-being. Next, I want you to learn about the benefits of movement, so physical activity and exercise to mental and physical health, and also discover the ways through my research through which physical activity and exercise improve the mental health and physical health of individuals experiencing high stress. I'm asking for a volunteer to give me a definition of what stress means to you. Anyone have a definition? What is stress?
Anxiety.
High anxiety. That's good. Like you're feeling an anxious state. It's a stressful state. That's a good answer. Someone in the back? Trouble sleeping. That's a good behavioral kind of impact that stress has on us. Over there in the back.
Anything that causes change in our bodies?
Something that causes change in our bodies. That is a great basic definition of what a stressor is. Something that is a stimulus that causes a change or a perturbation in our physiological or mental states. That's great.
Remember Henselius' definition.
That is Hensel. Yes, that is the Henselius definition. Okay. Anyone else? Overthinking, rumination, overthinking. That's a process that actually leads to stress getting worse. That's great. And I'll have one more. Right, so it's something that elevates heart rate and blood pressure. So an event, whether it's external or even internal, something that we're thinking about, that causes an experience of our cardiovascular system shifting. So similar to that perturbation, something has been changed. Now, the general definition of stress is that we do not have the resources to meet the demands of a situation. We don't have the social or psychological resources to be able to meet the demands of a situation. Now, researchers complicate things. This is our model of stress that we presented in a manuscript in 2018 called the Transdisciplinary Model of Stress, integrating contextual, historical, habitual, and acute stress processes. That's a mouthful. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of it, not every single step. I'll walk you through the audience. You probably can't, I almost can't even read this from this distance, but I'm going to walk you through. We have an acute stressful event. Something happens on a daily basis or right now during the day that causes a psychological or physiological response. Psychologically, an event occurs. And psychologically, we appraise it as either threatening or challenging or just benign, right? If we experience it as challenging or threatening, then that will lead to a cascade of physiological and psychological responses. So we might, if we see it as threatening, we might engage in that unstoppable worry and overthinking because we're trying to come up with some solutions that are not always the best solutions, but we're trying to come up with solutions. We're ruminating on things and we're dwelling in it to try and decrease that threat and somehow turn it into some sort of problem solving, right? We also have some emotional responses. We have different emotions that kind of come up when we're stressed out. We might have an increase in negative mood, a decrease in positive mood. So we might feel less happy, more sad, more angry, more anxious. And we also have physiological responses when we're stressed out. And that's here in red and black. It says multi-system physiological responses to psychological stress or to a psychological stressor. And those kind of events, those kind of stress, physiological responses, is we have a flood of adrenaline and noradrenaline or epinephrine and norepinephrine, a flood of it that activates our cardiovascular system and gets us ready for fight or flight. Right? Have people heard of fight or flight? This idea that we have to get our bodies ready. There's new iterations of that model. They also talk about fawning and freezing. So some people, instead of during a stressful event, instead of fighting or flying, they might fawn, which is get very socially integrated with other individuals. And some people freeze fully. And you'll see that in maybe some children, some grandchildren that you may have or yourself, that during an event, you actually just fully freeze. Right? And it's not fighting or not fleeing, but it's like full frozen. We also have a release of cortisol, which is activated in the moment. It's activated to release glucose levels because we need glucose in our brain to help us think. We need glucose to support a whole bunch of physiological systems. So cortisol helps with the release of glucose. And that's some of the systems that are activated when we are stressed out. And this is all a healthy, normal thing. We need to respond to stress. If not, we wouldn't be able to get through our day. But the problem is, with repeated exposures to stressful events, we end up wearing down our physiological systems. We have these physiological systems that get activated repeatedly over time. Everyone can hear me now? They get activated repeatedly over time that start wearing down the rest of the physiological systems. We start seeing those systems at the cardiovascular level. The immune system gets worn down. It can't respond as well. It can't heal wounds as well. But it also leads to this infiltration of inflammation that just is this ongoing inflammation that happens in our body when we experience high stress. So that's that side. Now, what kind of manages how we respond to stressors? There's genetic, there's developmental, things that happen in our early life experiences, how our parents raised us. There's environmental and sociocultural factors that I'm not going to get into them all, but those influence how we respond to stress on any day when a stressful event happens. There's also cumulative stress that happens earlier in life, early adversity, that can influence how we then respond to stress later on in life. And also the accumulation of stressful events over time can potentially sensitize us to future negative events that happen even on a daily basis. And I'm going to show some of this research. So how does stress affect the body when we think about the wearing down of all these physiological systems? There are respiratory and cardiovascular problems, that's over here. And it talks about in this figure that I have a slide there and we can share the slides at some point. When you're stressed, the need for oxygen becomes greater. The muscles around the lungs tense and breathing becomes faster and more shallow. Our reproductive system gets affected. Our musculoskeletal system gets affected. Cardiovascular system, digestive system, the endocrine system, they get affected. All these systems get worn down, and they have more difficult times mounting the types of responses that are needed to manage other physiological needs. We also have effects in the central nervous system. High stress context, individuals who undergo a lot of stress in their daily lives or in their lifespan are more likely to have depression, mental health problems, so it has a negative effect that way. So I'm going to touch on two studies where we used massive data from across these large national studies. One of them, the study is called the Health and Retirement Study. The Health and Retirement Study is a study that started, I'm not going to get there yet. The Health and Retirement Study is a study that started in the 1990s, so it's now ongoing for 32 years. Every 2 years, in a cohort of older adults who started at the age of 50, tracking them every 2 years as they enter, it's called health and retirement, as they enter retirement and then move towards later retirement. And of course, it's been 35 years. Some of these individuals have passed away. And really trying to understand the effects of economic well-being, economic factors, and also psychological factors and adversity factors, and how they've affected people's health and well-being across the lifespan. And having 32 years worth of data is just magical. You rarely see studies like this. Now, telomeres, this study, it's called lifespan adversity and later adulthood telomere length. So we're looking at telomeres. So telomeres are these genetic pieces that are at the end of our DNA. They are TTAGG nucleotides. Those are three different types of nucleotides, T, A, and G, repeated thousands of times. And they encapsulate the end of the DNA strands. Now, can someone tell me in the room what the purpose of DNA is? I'll tell you. Protein production. It's here to help us go from DNA, we then transcribe it into RNA, and it's translated into a protein. And that's what helps our cells in our body function. Now, the telomeres are at the end of the DNA, and when it was discovered, they used to call it junk DNA because it's this repeated DNA, TTAGGG, that they used to think, they've discovered this might not be true, they used to think codes for nothing. No protein is coded from TTAGGG repeated thousands of times. So there's no purpose to it. So they called it junk DNA. They thought it had no purpose. But what they've discovered is that's the purpose, is to not code for important protein. Because if the purple or blue part is the part that codes for important protein that keeps cell functioning, you don't want to have any damage that occurs within there. And if I didn't have a microphone in my hands, the way that the DNA is kind of packed in and the telomeres are packed in, when DNA is not being replicated and turned into another cell and it's dividing, DNA is usually crumpled up and the telomeres and all these proteins kind of protect it around the edges, okay, and kind of like protects all around it with all these proteins and this DNA. Now, every time a cell divides, if people have taken a biology class and remember that biology class, it's called the 3' end replication problem. What happens is at the 3' end of the DNA, which is over here, every time a cell divides, the cell loses some of that DNA, right? So if every time a cell divides and you start losing some DNA, that could be important protein producing DNA, and you don't want that to happen. So you have these telomeres that if you lose anything, you're not losing anything that's producing a protein. So every time a cell divides, it then leads to cell division, and you're not losing the important DNA producing protein producing DNA. Now, at some point, every time a cell divides, you're going to lose that important DNA, and over time, you get to a critical point where the cell realizes, hey, any further divisions, any more damage that happens to the exterior of the ends will actually start leading to poor protein production. And you don't want that because poor proteins or poorly produced proteins are cancer cells. And you don't want to have these cancer cells. And you don't want these cells that are not producing are functioning well. So you end up, the cell leads into a process of programmed cell death. It kills itself, it tries to kill itself. And you don't want all your cells dead, but when a cell is not functioning well, you want it to be able to be killed by itself. And part of the way that it does that is it sends signals to other cells, the cell-eating cells, the macrophages, sell signals to all these other cells to come and kill it. It's great process. What they've discovered is that shortened telomeres are related to future mortality, future disease risk. So it is also not, if you're in your immune system at this point or your blood, people who have shorter cells, shorter telomeres are more likely in the future to have more health problems earlier. This is that study I was telling you about. There's been all these cohorts. So they started in 1992. They've tracked them as they age. These people were between 50 and 55 years old. They also had another cohort of 70 to 100-year-olds that then they continued tracking. As you can see, more and more people passed away in this study over 30 years when you recruit people in their 70s. And every time they've lost some people in the study, they've introduced new cohorts into it. So you can see here this beautiful picture of all the different cohorts. They've had 8 different cohorts at this time, kind of starting into the study. They've had over 30,000 people in the study at this point. It's pretty phenomenal. So in this trial, and I'm going to read this for everyone in the back, in this study, they had different measures of adversity that they collected. They had measures on childhood adversities. So when you were a child, did you have to relocate due to financial difficulties? Did your family receive financial help from another family member? Was your father ever unemployed? Did you have trouble with police before the age of 18? Did you have to repeat school? Were you physically abused? Did your parents use drugs or alcohol? They also had questions on adult adversities. Did you ever experience the death of a child, experience the death of a spouse, experience a natural disaster, fired a weapon in combat, had a partner addicted to drug and alcohol, and so on and so on. So they had a whole bunch of different factors that they measured. Now, I'm just going to focus on this side over here. It's called the adjusted. So everything in this analysis, we wanted to see whether all these stressors that have happened across these individuals' lives, does it predict having shorter telomeres in later life? This line, if any of these lines cross this dotted line over here, any of these bars cross this dotted line, it would suggest that none of these factors do not predict above and beyond chance the risk of having shorter telomeres later in life. None of these cross that line. So having one of these, any of these, really at the end of the day, having something happen in your life should not really be that damaging later on in life when you consider just one particular event. When you think of accumulated events, so this total lifespan adversity, which just popped up here on the top, there was a 8% increase odds or likelihood, so an 8% increased likelihood of having shorter telomeres if you had the more of these events that you had. For every additional one, there was an additional 8% increase. So it wasn't that any one of these particular events, it's just that the accumulation of these events over the lifespan can lead to further damage. When we pulled apart whether it was childhood adversities or adulthood adversities, and so we tabulated up all these childhood ones, all these adulthood ones, and we looked to see it was really driven by childhood adversities. And when we further went deeper into it, it was driven by psychosocial, not the financial childhood adversities, driven by having trouble with police, repeating school, physically abused, and parents used drugs and alcohol. There are many, these are just 4 items. There are so many studies on adverse childhood experiences that really have highlighted that the accumulation of familial abuse and neglect, or bullying and other environmental factors that happen earlier in life can damage us many, many years later on. So we are interested in another study is taking all this research that we now know is accumulating on adverse experiences that are occurring across the lifespan and seeing if it predicts mortality further on down the road. But what we were interested in is, as a psychologist, I'm like, yeah, it's all about psychology. But economists think it's all about the economy. Behavioralists think it's all about behaviors. Sociologists think it's all about the social environment. So we were interested in seeing what if we took all of these factors from the health and retirement study and threw them all at the data and let the data speak for itself. And that's what we were interested in. So we categorize these different groups of adverse experiences in childhood, so socioeconomic and psychosocial experiences in childhood, then adulthood socioeconomic conditions, so having financial difficulties in adulthood, unemployment rates, not global unemployment rates, but an individual's own unemployment experiences, their health behaviors, so their physical activity, their sleep, their cigarette smoking, their alcohol intake, social connections, how well people feel connected to other people. Do they have more difficult experiences with children, with their spouses, with their family, friends, and so on, or do they have good experiences? Also psychological characteristics, so people who are have high neuroticism or high openness to experience. How do those play into mortality risk? And then also adverse experiences during childhood, like discrimination. This is all the factors. I'm going to quiz you on the seventh one. No, there's no quiz here. The red line is if the bar does not cross the red line on any of these 57 factors, that means in this model of looking at every single factor, does it predict mortality? 43 of these 57 factors as individual factors predicts mortality. Okay, so each one of these factors, a majority of these factors that we were interested in, and it really substantiates the fields that we all study. If this is a field that someone has studied in this room, it substantiates it. Economic factors do, social factors do, adverse factors do. They all impact. But we were interested, and this is like the actual numbers of the top hitting ones. So being a smoker increases the risk of early mortality by 90%. History of divorce increased it by 45%. Alcohol abuse, 36%. Recent financial difficulties, 30%, and so on. We then did some fancy statistical models where all of the factors went into one model. So it wasn't each one alone, which is what you're seeing here, but which ones are the top, which ones are leading. What was exciting, I guess, for a paper, not for life, but was exciting for a paper was that really, if you look at the colors of green and red and green and orange and purple and blue, that all levels that people study, they all impact mortality. So it's not driven by any particular one alone. Not surprisingly, smoking drives a big part of mortality. History of divorce in this model of all these 57 factors was also was a top predictor. Financial difficulty, so individuals who've recently had some financial difficulties, who rate their financial difficulties as high. Being male in the United States does increase the risk of earlier mortality. In Canada, we're pretty much almost near between men and women in mortality rates. History of food stamps, which really does capture also that the economic insecurity. Negative affectivity, so feeling someone who sees more negative in life experiences is a driver here. Childhood psychosocial adversity, so that those same factors that we talked about in the last paper that I showed you, those are also major drivers of mortality, early mortality years later. These are experiences that happen in childhood that are predicting later life mortality rates. Negative interactions with their own children, and also individuals who have anger out. There's this concept in psychology, anger out, anger in. Anger in is more closely associated with depression, anxiety, anger out with more anger outbursts. Anger out has been associated with cardiovascular disease. So individuals who express more anger towards others, people outwardly, have higher rates of mortality. Okay, just looking at the type. So one thing to note is that it's not just these large negative events in our lifespan that are predicting health and well-being later on in life. There's this research started by David Almeida at Penn State University looking at daily stressor reactivity. Individuals, we're all different. Some of us on a daily event, something stressful happens, our negative mood goes up a little bit, right? So some individuals have this low reactivity on a daily basis where our negative mood doesn't really change much on a stressful day versus a non-stressful day. Some individuals really go up a lot more than other individuals, right? And there's work by David Almeida and all his colleagues, and there's probably over 100 papers at this point, really showing that individuals who have strong changes in their, very big changes in their negative mood, so their negative mood goes really up on a stressful day compared to a non-stressful day, or their positive mood goes really down on a stressful day versus a non-stressful day, those individuals who have very big swings in their affect is what we call it, or mood, emotions that we can use in lay terms, those individuals who have those big changes compared to the smaller changes, those individuals 10, 20 years later have greater risk of chronic health conditions, whether it's mental or physical chronic health conditions. And in this work that we've done in our lab, and I'll just talk about it briefly. You don't even have to look at it. I'll just tell you it. What we've shown is that individuals who experience more chronic stress in their lives, when they have an event in a certain particular day that is stressful, it's that much worse for them in terms of their mood. Their stress reactivity, or the amount that their negative affect changes on a stressful day versus a non stressful day, just goes up that much higher if there's a pile up of negative mood that's building up, or negative experiences that are building up, more chronic stress that's building up, that just makes and compounds what's happening today that much worse. Who's excited by all this research? It's really depressing. Uh, every time, this is where it starts shifting. Okay, I promise you. So, um, stress gets under our skin. We talked about some of the physiological pathways, but we also choose unhealthy foods when we're stressed out. We also are less physically active, tend towards more sedentariness when we're stressed out. We're more likely to gain weight when we're stressed out, and that's physiological. Um, we are more likely, if anyone remembers the early years of the pandemic, some people started drinking a lot more. There's an excessive during stress. People are more likely to drink and also smoke more. And a lot of these behaviors actually dampen the stress pathways and calm the stress pathways down. So it's actually physiological. Our drive towards these negative behaviors is physiologically driven. It feels good. It calms down that whole stress pathway system. A cigarette will calm down that system. So it makes sense that high stress is related to smoking. So, how do people here manage their stress with those activities? Anyone engage in more physical activity when they're stressed out? A handful of people. You're the lucky ones. Uh, who engages in less physical activity when they're stressed out? A whole bunch of people as well. Yep. Um, and I'm sure people experience when they're stressed out, they go to the fridge more often, right? I'm lucky. I get stressed out and I forget to eat, so I'm a very lucky person. But I might go towards the excessive alcohol sometimes. Um, okay, so let's talk about exercise. I love this figure. It says, I'm prescribing exercise. Think of it as a stress pill that takes 30 minutes to swallow. Walking is man's best medicine, Hippocrates. So, what are the benefits of exercise? Reduces dementia by 30%, reduces hip fractures by 68%, reduces depression by 30%, reduces all cause mortality by 30%, cardiovascular disease by 35%, type 2 diabetes by 40%, colon cancer by 30%, breast cancer by 20%. The benefits of physical activity are very well established. It is probably the best thing anyone can do that has very few, if any, side effects for our bodies and for our well-being. So recently, the CSEP, which is the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology, they came out with the 24-hour movement guidelines. Make your whole day matter. And they have some recommendations, and this is a bit small, so I'll read this out. They have recommendations for moving more, reducing your sedentary time, and sleeping well. What do they recommend? For physical activity, they recommend at least 150 minutes per week. They recommend muscle strengthening at least twice a week. And they also recommend some light walking, so standing and just walking very lightly. They recommend 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And they also recommend no more than 3 hours of recreational screen time and breaking up long periods of sitting as much as possible. So I'm going to present some work that we did. Most of this work is coming from San Francisco when I was there over 8 years ago, but the study bled into when I transferred here to the University of British Columbia. It's a study that I think is more close to many of the people in the room's heart, people who are family caregivers, individuals who are providing care to a family member with Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. In this study, we had 68 participants recruited, mostly women, some men, who we had recruited to engage in a physical activity program for 6 months. This was our whole package of questionnaires that we asked them to do, but really what's important is We got them to give us some blood. We got them to do some to do a maximal test to find out what their heart health was and their capacity for oxygen consumption. So we got, and they also completed a whole bunch of questionnaires along the way. And then for 6 months, they were either randomized to this exercise group or to do nothing for 6 months, or continuing to do what they were doing beforehand for 6 months. And then they completed everything again at the end. This is one of our participants who allowed me to use this picture. This is our trainer. We gave everyone a free membership to a YMCA that was near and dear to their homes. So we didn't make them travel for an hour or 2 hours. Wherever they wanted to go, they were able to go to a YMCA, and we paid for that membership. We also provided them with these devices to track their activities. We gave them a whole plan of 60 minutes per week for the first week at their low, kind of low moderate zone of physical activity, basic movement stuff. That's like a little bit of a brisk walk, all the way to their higher end of their moderate activity group. And we asked them to get to those 150 minutes that are recommended. By week 9, and then for the next 15 weeks or 4 months, they continued engaging in that amount of exercise. We also send them weekly reports like, hey, congratulations, you did great this week. You hit 150 minutes like you wanted to. Keep going. If they didn't hit those goals, we sent them an email saying, hey, you did 30 minutes this week. Great work this week. It must have been difficult to reach the 150. Let's get on a phone call and let's figure out a way to help you get more active if that's what you want to do. We sent them these reports. We also sent them text messages. Today is a great day for a walk. Meet a friend for a brisk walk instead of coffee or lunch, right? So we try to encourage some social engagement. And this was mostly around, we asked them what their barriers would be and what would facilitate them becoming more active. And we use that information to kind of craft these text messages that started going out to them 4 times per week. We were challenged by one of our participants, our first participant, he said, you'll never be able to write 6 months worth of text messages that are different every single time. And we're like, we're on that. And so we did that, and we made sure that everyone got unique text messages for what their barriers were. We also talked to them once a week to talk about kind of the barriers that they were facing to being physically active. And help them kind of think through using motivational interviewing, these techniques that are built through psychology, clinical psychology, these techniques to really help people identify their barriers, figure out what would help them start being more physically active for the next week. So we have 3 papers that I'm going to present that we had where we were comparing the people who exercised for those 6 months versus the people who were randomized to the control group. This is the first paper. It's called Aerobic Exercise Lengthens Telomeres and Reduces Stress in Family Caregivers, a randomized controlled trial. It was published in Psychoneuroendocrinology in 2018. What's amazing is that in this group of participants who were randomized to the exercise group, over that 6-month period, completing 150 minutes per week, we had about a 70% success rate on a weekly basis, 72, 73%. These are people who went from almost nothing to 150, 70% of the time. If we consider something a bit of a lower bar, 120, but to go from 0 to 120 is pretty amazing, the success rate was over 80. When we think about their cardiorespiratory fitness, this is a good manipulation check. If they actually exercised, it means that they've got healthier in their cardiovascular system and their respiratory system. And you can see that there was an increase, a positive increase for the exercisers, a negative, non-significant, that's what the NS means, for the control group participants. And this increase compared to this decrease was significant. So it's called a treatment effect. If we think about their telomere length, there was an increase in the telomere length of the exercise group that was significantly different. That's what this part is, that's bar. This increase that happened here was statistically different than the increase here. I know these 2 bars look different from each other, but those were not significantly different from each other. Give me a moment. Okay, their perceived stress changed. Those who exercise dropped by 5 points on this scale called the perceived stress scale. Those who in the control group did not change in their perceptions of stress. So it seems that exercise not only changed their telomere length, their cardiovascular system, but also their stress levels. There was also a change in their body mass index. This treatment effect was different than the other ones. The exercise group stabilized in their BMI, whereas the control group increased even more over that 6-month period in their BMI. In this next paper that we wrote in Annals of Behavioral Medicine that was published in 2020, my grad student, my PhD student, Benjamin Hives, he wrote this paper where we took all the other psychology measures that we assessed in the study to look to see, did we change depression? Did we change the burden that they felt as a caregiver? And so on. Did they, what changed? So what I'm going to present to you the different measures that we had. We had measures on caregiver burden. So how much burden were these individuals feeling from providing care to their family member? Most of them were spouses, but some of them were parents. Loneliness, social support, rumination, emotion regulation, optimism, pessimism. The main outcomes were that caregiver burden, depressive symptoms, and mastery, a sense of mastery that they have control over their lives, seemed to have increased. Mastery increased, but the caregiver burden and depressive symptoms decreased in those who became exercisers compared to the ones who were in the control group. We then followed up on a daily basis before they started exercising and at the end of the trial. We had them complete, some people may have heard of these things called ecological momentary assessments. If you've ever been in a research study where people ping you 6 times a day and annoy you with questions 6 times a day for a whole week, they're called ecological momentary assessments. So if anyone asks you to do that, say yes, we need you to complete those kind of studies. They're annoying, but they help us a lot because it helps us understand what's happening, what are you feeling, what are you thinking on a daily basis throughout your day. So 6 times, your day is chunked up into 6 periods of 2.5 hours. We ping you a whole bunch of times during that day, asking you questions about your feelings and your stressors and all that kind of stuff. We do it a second day, a third day, a fourth day, a fifth day, a sixth day, and a seventh day. And we do that at the beginning of the trial before they exercised, and then at the end of the trial to really understand, did we change people's daily life experiences? We had some basic questions on rumination. So have you been unable to stop thinking about stressful situations today or in the past 2 hours? Do you feel that you can control important things in your life today? This was asked 6 times that day. Negative affect. Please rate the extent to which you are feeling angry, anxious, embarrassed, sad, fatigued, frustrated, lonely, and then positive mood, happy, content, energetic, compassionate, and relaxed. So I am just going to pull this up. What we found is that, what are these top bars? These top bars tells you that whatever happened in the exercise group is different from what happened in the control group. It's called a treatment effect. So every single one of these questions changed somehow in one group, and that change was different than the change that happened in the control group, if no control group happened. Rumination. The exercise group went down. You can see this decrease. The waitlist control group, there was no change in how much they were ruminating during the day. The exercise group went up in their sense of control during the day. They went down in their negative affect, and they went up in their positive affect. Whereas the control group, actually, their negative affect got worse. Their sense of control didn't change. They actually had a little boost in their positive affect, but it was not the same kind of boost that was seen in the exercise group. So in other words, from these three components of this one trial, we changed physical health, general mental health like depression and perceived stress, and also how people were functioning on a daily basis, how they were experiencing their days. So the take home so far is that exercise can improve these novel and traditional markers of health, improves how we experience our days, and also it's really important to understand our motivation, our barriers, and the facilitators for health behavior change. So because we are a public talk, I thought I would do a little bit of an activity. Okay, I want you to think, in an average week over the past month, how much time have you spent moving your body at moderate to vigorous levels? So moderate levels being You're increasing your heart rate. You're having a little bit of like difficulty not breathing, but you're elevating your respiration rate. This could include everything. Moderate activity is everything from like walking to light swimming. It could be anything that you. Gardening is moderate activity. How much time do you spend? Less than 30 minutes per week, more than 30 minutes per week, but not more than the 150 that's recommended, or for sure more than 150 minutes per week. Can I ask who here does 150 minutes or more per week? Oh my God, amazing. It's fantastic. Okay, I'm going to ask people for 5 volunteers did not raise their hands, who are in the lower groups, and not to be embarrassed because lately I'm not there either. I have a bad knee. My dog ran into it. I can't do it all. I'm really stressed from work. So I'm not hitting that 150 minutes myself. So there's no shame here. I'm asking for 5 people, 4 people to come up to the front of the room. If anyone's willing who is not in the bottom group. You're willing to come up? Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
One at a time? I thought we were
No, we're all 4 of you are coming, or 2. Yeah, we're gonna stand over here. This is number 10. Over here is all the way to 10. Over here is number 1. Okay? So this is the least likely or the least important, and this is the most important. How important is regular exercise to you? Starting at 1 here, least important, most important over there. So we can assume this is the middle 5 mark, 10 is over there. How important is it? Okay. How capable do you feel about exercising at 150 minutes per week, going from a 1 to a 10?
we're missing 2 or 3 people.
Oh, we are missing 2 or 3 people. I would place myself here too. How's this? I'm going to place myself here too. Thank you for this. Now, my question for you is, what would help you get to number 10? Help you get back to how important you feel it is?
Hmm. More time in the day.
More time in the day. That's great. That's a great barrier.
And
Yeah.
less other commitments. I'm retired, so there's no work commitments, but
No work
but
commitments.
other commitments.
Yeah. Can I ask you? What would help you go to how important you think it is from how you feel capable to do it? Yes. Yeah. What would make you move?
I think the opposite. Staying, I think prioritizing my time better.
Prioritizing your time better.
Overloading my commitments.
Yeah, overloading commitments. So it sounds very similar type of barriers. We feel that we place a lot of barriers, or we have a lot of commitments to ourselves, and it's hard to kind of prioritize that physical activity component or our health component above and beyond all these other things. And I think this is kind of where our society has kind of put us towards, is all these other commitments are so much more important than our health and well-being, right? Does anyone have advice? Like, how do you, if you do reach 150 minutes, and the answer can't be, I just prioritize it. What have you done that has brought anyone in this room who was not at 150, who had a lot of commitments, and then brought yourself to a place of 150? I'll ask you. Read the research. So the research, the information made you realize that it's something that you wanted to prioritize. Did you have to shift your schedule at all? You got rid of your car. Amazing. So you walk everywhere now. Fantastic. And walking is movement. Walking is exercise. And I actually, one of my biggest takeaways that I want you to come away here with is that exercise does not have to happen in a gym. We all think, we're all told, and the fitness industry is telling us that exercise has to happen in a fitness center. It does not have to happen in a fitness center. It can happen in your garden, it can happen in your neighborhood, it can happen in your walks. That's where it happens. I saw another person at the back. How do you break down what is moderate exercise?
Yes.
Moderate exercise is anything that makes your heart rate elevate. It makes your, I wouldn't say out of breath because that's vigorous exercise, but pushes you to have to take in deeper breaths in order to move your body. It doesn't have to be like very deep breaths, but your breathing rate increases, your heart rate increases. It doesn't have to be full sweat. It just has to be movement. And there's a lot of research coming out that walking is beneficial and reduces risk for mental and physical health problems years down the road, as much as, maybe not as much as, but close to as much as doing very vigorous kind of running and jogging. Walking is great. Walking is one of the best things that we can do for our health in our lifespan.
So
Especially
if
as we get older, it's harder to
So-
do those vigorous. Yes.
so if we do less moderate exercise but more rigorous, would that cut down in the time?
So that's a great question. No, in the past, people would say yes. They would say, they used to say in Canada and the whole world, 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous or somewhere in between if you do a combination. Now they just say 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous. So they've changed it, but my whole thing is one step is more than one less step. So one step is more, and anything is better than nothing, in my opinion. Yes. The Apple Watch. So using technology.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for some people that works. Devices do nothing for me. They actually stress me out. Yeah, they tell you when to get up, and yeah, it's great.
Measure your heart rate.
They measure your heart rate. Yeah, exactly. So when you think about moving your body as opposed to exercise, and think about it could be walks versus a gym, does that shift at all kind of your capability? Do you use a calendar?
Yes.
Are there any rooms in there for like a 10-minute walk?
Oh yeah, 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so
But-
10 minutes is better than 30. It's better than zero,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
10 minutes is just something that you can do that could just be a walk in the neighborhood that you do. And it also is a stress reliever, not just good for your heart. So I'm going to suggest to you both to try 10 minutes tomorrow. Not every day, just try 10 minutes, see how you feel. Record it before and after, see how you feel, kind of see if your mood changed at all, if your stress reduced at all, and just savor that and be like, you know what, I just noticed that I feel better from that 10-minute experience, and I might do this again tomorrow. Look at your calendar and say, maybe it's going to be at 2, right? So do a bit of scheduling. But now you can sit down. Thank you for joining. Thank you. So there are a few factors, and I'm going to stop in a couple of minutes so that we can ask questions. A few factors to think about when we have a change in behavior. Are we capable? What opportunities do we have? And how much is our motivation? And these are really important things to be thinking about. Opportunity is everywhere if you see the opportunity. Again, it doesn't have to be the gym. Opportunity is social as well. Do you have people to do it with? And do you have a supportive network who allow you to do it? That's also part of the opportunity. Are we physically or psychologically capable? Can we accomplish this in principle? Do we feel that our body can do that movement? And if it can't do the run, maybe the run isn't right for you. Maybe it's something that has to be smaller, something that's more manageable, that you're capable at to build that self-esteem and also our motivation. So just a few tips, find something you enjoy. If you don't enjoy it, you'll never do it. Okay, it has to be something that you enjoy. The research shows the more people enjoy the type of activity that they choose, the more likely they're going to do it later down the road in a year, 2 years, and so on. Find your community. If you love working out with other individuals, if you like your community of your background, so if you are Jewish, or if you have, or if you are Chinese and you like working out with people within your community, find that community within community centers. Go look for those individuals. Because there are groups everywhere of specific individuals or just older adults who you can work out with. I myself, my community is me. I hate working out with other people. But I had to learn that when my friend used to drag me to workouts, classes all the time, and I'd walk out in a worse mood than when I started. If you love technology, pick up some watches, Detect. Slow and steady does win this race. Start off very slow. Find the things you like. Don't make the commitment to 150 minutes if you're at 0. It won't work, and you're going to hate yourself that you weren't able to accomplish it. Start off small, build it up, and then schedule it. It works for some people where if you're someone who loves your calendar, put it into your calendar and make it as important as your job, as your volunteer experience, as you're calling up whatever relative you have in your phone that's in your phone, put it in your calendar and make it a priority. And also it's important to think about, like, why am I not doing this? What are my barriers and how can I overcome these barriers? And there's a lot of tips online on overcoming some of these barriers. And on that note, I'm just going to wrap up. Work out more, move your body. I actually think conceptualizing it as moving your body is so much better than thinking about it as a workout, thinking about it as exercise. Just move the body more, and then the benefits will be reaped. And on that note, if you're interested, this is my Twitter handle if you care about, or X, whatever it's called. It's called Unthink Exercise is my Twitter handle, because I'm really trying to help people not think about exercise as exercise, but as movement. And that's my son in the background, when he was like 1.5 years old, and we used to go for hikes all the time. And that's it. Thank you. If you have questions, we have time for questions. I know we have this room until we have like 10, 15 minutes for questions or something. Yeah, 20 minutes of questions. So if people have questions, yeah. Yeah. Oh, so the question was, how do you measure that the telomere length is disappearing? So there are actual no cutoffs right now. There's no standard value, and this is in the field of science for human health. This is the major criticism of the research on telomere length is like, what is short telomeres, right? So in most studies, like the study I presented, they'll take the let's say we had 5,000 people. You see, I started like talking. They have 5,000 people in the study. They'll take the bottom quarter, the 1,250 people who are at the bottom of their lengths and their telomeres, and those will be considered short telomeres, people with shorter telomeres than the other 3/4 of the people who had longer telomeres. So it's one of the biggest criticisms of this field of telomere research in humans, because in rats, rodents, monkeys, everything that we can manipulate and change in a lab, the research is like definite that short telomeres and low levels of the telomerase enzyme that keeps telomeres long, which I didn't talk about, but low levels of this telomerase enzyme, short telomeres, low levels of telomerase, we know within rodents will kill those rodents so much faster. They have grayer hair faster. They lose hair, patches of hair faster. So the next generation of those rodents, if they're programmed to no longer be able to produce telomeres and they pass on that gene, or not telomeres, telomerase, and they pass on that gene, they die earlier during their youth, these rodents. So we know from the rodent research that these are essential. We can't do that in humans, right? We can't manipulate your genes for science purposes, unless it's beneficial as like an experiment for cancer research. But so in humans, we can't do those manipulations. So all we can do is like the people who are shorter versus longer. How does that predict, if you have short now, does it predict future disease in the later on, right? So that's the best we can do. Yeah. There are companies that sell you a kit to get your saliva to then be able to measure your telomeres and track it over time. I would not buy into any of these companies. I would not. I mean, people really are basic standards of like, what's your heart like, your heart rate, your glucose levels, your CRP levels, all those levels that we go and get at the doctors. They're pretty good measures. We don't need to also have telomere length. But there are companies where you can send in your saliva and get your current telomere length and find out. Yeah. So the reversibility question is one of the biggest questions. So the question was, if you have early trauma, can you reverse it and improve some of these health measures? I sure as hell hope so, for my sake. With early trauma, no study has yet to be completed where we have taken people with early childhood adversity, provided an exercise routine, and then looked at health outcomes. Our lab is about to do that. I have a new postdoc who we're going to start testing. We're not looking at telomeres yet. We're just going down the path of, can we shift some of how we respond to stress as adults? If we had early childhood trauma, can we shift it through an exercise program? Can we shift how people are responding physiologically? We're also doing some other work, and Brooke, who's here, she's helping lead a project where we are looking at people with early, and we're using a sample of 3,000 people, so it's a much larger data set collected in the United States over a 25-year period. We're looking to see those individuals have early childhood trauma, what are their trajectories of CRP or C-reactive protein, which is a measure of liver inflammation that causes, it's a measure of inflammation that's of a protein that's produced from the liver, by the liver. We're looking at what are the trajectories in adulthood of CRP as a response to early adversity, and then also looking to see whether if they are physically active in adulthood, does it change some of these trajectories of CRP? So we are starting to try to build that evidence in our lab to answer specifically these questions. When are we publishing it? It depends on how quickly Brooke works. Right, Brooke? No, I'm kidding. That paper I think we'll have out within the next 6-7 months is my guess. And then the work with the exercise intervention, it's a pilot program now in 100 young adults to look to see if we're changing stress physiology. That hopefully we'll have all the data collected in the fall, published in the next year and a bit. Next question behind. Oh, sorry, over here. There's a question over here.
I recall the U.S. Health and Regenerative Study, of course, is in the States. Some of the other sample groups and study groups you're talking about sound like they might have been in Canada. My question really is, I'm wondering about the spectrum, whether it's broad or narrow, of people, the participants coming from different genders, ages, races, and genetic background.
Yeah, these are great questions. So the Health and Retirement Study, which is in the United States, is a nationally representative study. So they purposely try to have proportions that are proportionate to the distribution through race and ethnic factors, as well as gender factors or sex factors. When you analyze the data, you kind of control for all that, and you can then say, above and beyond all these other factors that we know are related to mortality, what's happening specifically with early childhood adversity and these factors? So we're able to say it's above and beyond. We didn't go specifically into, actually, that's not true. Our mortality paper, where we looked at all 57 factors and does it predict mortality, we also did follow-up analyses, whether it was different between the Black, Hispanic, and white participants, whether they were in the 60 to 70-year-old range versus the 70 and older year old range. We did a whole men versus women. We did a whole bunch of analyses. They weren't different for those 57 factors in general. There might have been some movement in what factor might be more important than another, but in general, it was similar kind of constellations of factors predicting. In Canada, we have the Canadian Longitudinal Study of Aging, which maybe some of you are participants in the project. I have not yet looked within that project on any of this stuff, but it's something that I'm starting to think that a lot of my research I do has been based in the States. I'm not American, but because I spent so many years there and I love their data sets, that I end up doing a lot of studies on Americans. But I know that I actually want to start translating some of the work that we've done and look at some of the data sets in Canada. Hopefully that answered. Yeah. Yeah, sure. And then we'll go here and then here. Yeah, we'll go behind you
I
first.
just wondered, you mentioned earlier on one of your slides that the lifespan for men and women in Canada were similar, but not in the States. Why do you think that is?
So that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, men are behind women in most countries. We've just narrowed the gap in Canada a bit more than what they have in the States. I don't know why we've narrowed the gap. I mean, partly we have a better healthcare system. Yeah, I'm not sure why the gap has been narrowed. If anyone knows why the gap has been narrowed, I actually can't think of that reason. But there's also genetics, like just basic what's happening with the chromosomes. Having an XX is protective up until menopause, right? So there's a lot of protection that's happening. So it could just be that the damage that starts happening in men is happening just a few years earlier, and then with women following menopause, then it starts looking more like a different profile physiologically that then might why you have like an extra 4 or 5 years of life. Yes.
I'm just wondering how familiar you are with the CLSA.
So yeah, so the CLSA is I'm familiar with it. I know it exists. I've looked at their data, what they've collected. I've never analyzed their data, but the CLSA is a study in 40,000 Canadians that has been tracked for 15 years now. I think every 5 years, every 3 years that they have tracked individuals' blood coming in for physio, coming in for not physio, but stool, MRI, brain, like everything, psychology. There's a whole bunch of questions in there. So I am hoping to start analyzing some of that data. Part of the reason why I use American data over Canadian data here at the CLSA, you have to apply for it. They only allow you 3 times a year to submit. In the States, anytime I can just like go and download some data because it's all publicly available mostly. So it's just easier to kind of complete some of these studies there than they are here. Any other questions? Yes. So the question was, other than physical activity, what also can lengthen? Social connections has been shown. So it's really hard to do social connection interventions where you take people and make them socially active and like the group that they're talking to and then look to see. That's a bit harder to do. But there is a lot of research showing that people who feel socially connected have longer telomeres. So there is some good epidemiological research. Sorry. Mindfulness has been shown to change our physiology, our stress responsivity, our epigenetics. So if people have heard about epigenetics, so we have our DNA that produces proteins, but whether you're producing those proteins or not has a lot to do with whether you have um, different methylation profiles on those genes. So you can actually turn off a gene or turn on a gene, and they've shown that high stress can actually lead to more methylation on our DNA, which can actually shut off some genes from producing the proteins that we need. And mindfulness has been shown to do some reversal on epigenetics. There's controversies on those studies. A lot of people say those studies aren't designed well, and you can't change epigenetics. But there's more and more growing research that mindfulness can actually do some reversal of a lot of the physiological and psychological damage that happens to us just by living as humans and being stressed out. Should we take one more question, or how are we doing for time? One more? Okay.
If dietary data was included in the study.
Dietary data in most studies, so I have not included dietary data in these studies. Most studies do a terrible job collecting data on diet. You need to complete they're called, the recall, the 7-day recall, where you complete this very intense kind of recording of what you've eaten, and then the dietitian or nutritionist then figures out the nutrients involved within each. It's really rigorous of a method, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of skill. I have not used them in my trials. I just assume diet has changed, has remained stable, and that physical activity is what's producing these changes. But I now have a good friend of mine, Dr. Tamara Cohen, who's a director of dietetics at UBC, who we're going to start collaborating on some projects to try and kind of integrate both of these assessments. And on that, I want to thank you all. If you have questions, I will be here. But thank you so much for joining. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eli. We can see why we were sold out, right? Just to finish off the day, I'll tell you about the upcoming sessions that you can mark your calendar. We have one coming up in April 17th. It's called The Future of Aging, New Ways to Sustain and Support Your Wellness. And that's going to be presented by Dr. Janet Koo, who's a geriatrician and head of and vice president of Providence Healthcare, and has had much experience in all aspects of aging. And then the next one that I'll mention to you is one that's going to be May 31st. And that presenter is under the category of a futurist, and really kind of exciting discussion about thinking ahead as to what changes that there are already happening and what will happen in the field of aging. And she uses sometimes the language of aging is made up. And she's going to talk about thinking about one's identity and just new ways to put forward to us. So that one is May 31st, and you'll receive information in your email messages from further about these sessions. So thank you everyone for coming. It was great to see you here. It's wonderful to be in person. So thank you. And